We're coming from Hellenic History series from the Porphyria Foundation's Quest for Prometheus on Patreon.com, and here on Facebook Live, Love Letters to Greece.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're very excited to have with us a historian, a man who's been very dedicated to writing a very interesting book on the Balkan Wars, Peter Giakoumis.
Welcome, Peter.
Thank you so much for joining us. And first of all, we want to both say congratulations on doing such a great job on a book that is very difficult. I've never written a book, and I don't know if I'd have what it takes to have that kind of perseverance to write not just some kind of a novel or whatever, but a real historical work. So congratulations to you.
Thank you.
That's an amazing achievement.
Yes, we're very proud, and we can't wait to show everybody your book, which is a humongous volume, a reference book on a very interesting topic that's forgotten. And you're going to tell us all about this specific topic that you've fell in love with for like the past the decade, almost 7 years or so. So please tell us about your book, The Forgotten Heroes of the Balkan Wars, the Greek-Americans and Philhellene of 1912-1913.
Well, I want to start off by thanking you guys for hosting and having me on your show. All these years that I've been working on it, on and off, I've been sharing some of pieces of it. You guys kind of knew what I was doing. I like to say all along, and with your support, I'm here now talking about finally, after 7.5 years, finally getting this done. And we would talk about it on and off, and you guys, your support really helped me get to where I needed to. It was a labor of love. I worked very, very hard on it. Gave up plenty of outs and dinners and hanging with friends like you guys. I sacrificed a lot, and I'm glad that I was able to finish it.
Peter, I just want to say, by the way, when you say our support, it's really Billy's support. I just found out about this recently, and I think it's a very, very great subject to explore, because it's, we talk about world wars, and this kind of just the Balkan Wars, they just kind of fall between the cracks sometimes with people. They don't pay attention to it somehow, and it actually is quite a big deal, especially, well, obviously if you're into Balkan history, it's a big deal, but not only. And I think there are some very interesting lessons to learn from Peter's work, as we're going to be discussing right now.
Well, one of the things that comes to mind, at least for those of us that are more familiar with this, is why would anybody spend time on a small sliver of history, and what was the outcome, what was the bigger picture? And to me, what was more important is keeping context. So what was the reason for my delving into this? I just thought it was fascinating to know that in a short amount of time, the precursor to World War I was actually being monitored by Western powers. So it was a proxy war. The French and the English were basically facing off against the Germans, and all of the West was watching. They wanted to see what a, quote, modern war might look like. And everybody thought that, well, if small little nations in the Balkans, like Greece, like Montenegro, like Serbia, Bulgaria, are involved with modern weapons and modern tactics, imagine if large countries, right, like France or England, were to take on any kind of activity. And actually in 1911, from 1911 to 1912, Italy had a war with the Ottomans, and Italy took Tripoli, and that was very quick, but it was more or less one-sided. The Ottomans could not bring their resources to play in Libya on a scale that was available during the 1912-1913 Balkan Wars. So the powers figured, well, if this is how things can play, we can do it better. And that's where World War I comes to play. World War I was meant to play out very, very quickly based on what they saw. And we're talking about small, very small kingdoms. Greece was nowhere what we know of it today. It was half the size back in 1912. And Greece had a very small rating in terms of the British had done studies. the British had sent military observers, and in 1910 or so, there were military games that were being played out throughout the Balkans, and a lot of the military resources were being brought into play. Armies were being armed with modern technology, and as far as the Brits were concerned, they'd written internal paperwork that were classified that I got my hands on, and Greece was basically not a player at all. So and not even the Navy.
Let's bring our audience up to speed with what you're talking about. We have here the sick men of Europe, the Ottoman Empire that's crumbling. This is in the early 1900s. It began already. The genocide had started that they're committing on the Christian population, so they can eventually make it more Turkify the Ottoman Empire. And this kind of happens in the middle of all these genocides, which is a different subject. But Greece was trying to get a hold of its population that was in the Ottoman Empire at this time, in Asia Minor. It was trying to liberate people from there in northern Greece. So what Pete's talking about, the Balkan Wars, is when the subjects of the Ottoman Empire, the Orthodox nations of Serbia, especially Bulgaria and Greece, were still, some of them were part of the Ottoman Empire still, and this was a grand alliance of the Balkan states to get rid of the Ottoman Empire once and for all from the Balkans and liberate their population. So this is what we're talking about, and it all leads to the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913, and there were specific alliances that all these little countries had with the great powers and the Ottoman Empire as well, with all the other major powers, and it led to all these alliances crisscrossing paths and eventually leading to World War One.
Yeah, exactly, which is overlooked. It's almost easy to say, well, how do you place an event that transpired between October of 1912 and went into the summer, let's say, of 1913, and there were two wars in that short amount of time. So right, so now you're going to say, well, World War One started the following year and lasted how many years, and then that was followed by the next big World War Two, and then you have the Korean War, you have Vietnam, you have so many other events. In Greece, there was a civil war. How do you remember? How do you actually place into context the Balkan Wars that went by so quickly?
So Pete, you tell us, why is this important? Why did you tackle this subject?
Exactly, and so that was one of the catalysts behind why I thought it was important. It's been kind of pushed to the side by all these other events, whether bigger in scale, longer in time. That's part of history. But when Greece goes to war in 1912, they'd come from a loss. In 1897, they had lost a very short war, another short war, and almost lost the entire kingdom. Luckily, obviously, that didn't happen. 1912 comes, and now this is an opportunity for them to expand. And like you were saying, to unify and liberate the lands that were of Greeks. The country doubled in size. So Greece doubled in size, gained millions in population, and now you have a Greek nation that is forming itself in its modern its modern state, we know of today. Out of the Balkan Wars, Greece is the only country that maintained its new geography, its new boundaries. Montenegro, Serbia, Bulgaria, none of them kept any of those territories intact that they had at the end of the two wars. And obviously we know that the Ottoman Empire was crumbling and falling apart. So if that alone, is a driving force behind why is Greece shaped the way it is? Why is the nation itself that size? Well, it comes from the Balkan Wars. It comes from none of the other wars. So that in and of itself is a reason why we might want to focus on the history of it. Why is Greece the size it is? Why does it have all these other areas? The islands, a lot of the island people were liberated and unified with the Greek nation because of the Balkan Wars. That's also something that's overlooked. And, I didn't mention, of course, the catastrophe, right? 1919, 1922, the Smyrna catastrophe. That's another overpowering event. But again, the Balkan Wars open the doors to the bigger nation that Greece became, and it also incorporated the Greek diaspora on a level that had never ever happened again. It was the only time that the level of interest and patriotism that was shown was exemplified during the Balkan Wars. And that's my focus.
So basically, in so many ways, we could say that to understand Greece today, you really have to look out the Balkan Wars, because that basically is when we delineate that space. Because, again, we're going from, we had the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire fell to the Ottomans, and then it was a struggle for every every square foot of land of Greece since the revolution of 1821 that started that movement. And then the Balkan Wars, you finally see, I know it's still in World War II there were still some changes because of Italy, but essentially then you get Greece as she is today through the Balkan Wars, if I correctly understand.
Right, and that's key to understanding why Bulgaria decided to go against the Allies. Why did Bulgaria constantly fight the West? Well, it comes from the Balkan Wars.
Well, that was the weird thing, is how it switched alliances. That's why you have two of the wars, right? Because basically Bulgaria just said, okay, I'm going this way now. And it's a total surprise. You were fighting on the same front, and then all of a sudden, you take a sharp turn 180. That
continued on. That domino continued on from the Balkan Wars, right? From 1912, there was another war that followed in 1913 that Bulgaria fought and against its former allies, into World War I and into World War II.
Yeah.
So these things, why do they matter? That's why they matter. Understanding where they come from actually show us the path that was taken. Why did these things come about?
And Pete,
that's this.
As you covered, this actually takes back the northern Greek territories, which become part of the modern nation again, like Thrace, Macedonia, Epirus, especially Macedonia, right? And Thrace,
yes,
liberated
Macedonia and Voryo-Epiro.
And Voryo-Epirus even, which is now southern Albania, so the whole part of Epirus was liberated for the first time. And
we now know, by studying the Balkan Wars, you understand why Albania came into play. What was the structure behind it? Why didn't Greece end up with more of Epiro? It's all from what happened out of the Balkan Wars, and prior, during the treaties that were actually established, all part of the Balkan Wars. Sometimes we overlook this. Everybody overlooks it, unfortunately. And
even Greeks, they talk about Macedonia constantly, and they talk about the Macedonian struggle, but it becomes, this is the climax of it, and we don't cover the Balkan Wars. This is when Macedonia gets back into Greece.
Right, of course. Overlooked. And so not only is it important to understand then the background, the way warfare ended up evolving came out of the Balkan Wars. It wasn't from the Italian War with the Ottomans. It was from the actual Balkan Wars. So you have the use of airplanes, you have artillery. There's the concept of combined arms warfare comes from the Balkan Wars. Trench warfare that we see play out in World War I comes from the Second Balkan War. The Bulgarians had established trench warfare. The Greeks fought the Bulgarians in trenches.
Very interesting. It's basically what, in a sense, it's almost also reminding me of how the Spanish Civil War served as the preparation stage for World War II, where a lot of the weaponry was tested. So it seems like the Balkan Wars had a very similar function in that sense with World War I.
And I believe also a lot of the film industry, or the early film industry that was French and in Greece and the Balkans, actually was filming during this period too. We have a lot of documentation.
Yes, some of the earliest film reels that were created came from permission that was granted by the monarch in Greece. And so reporters were able to come in and film. And it's funny they bring it up. I was lucky enough to see footage that was put together at UCLA. So I contacted the university, and I actually got to see it. And it hasn't been shown publicly, but it in small and very. It's actually there was an event. There was an event out in on the West Coast, and there was one other showing. So we can't say that it wasn't literally not shown anywhere. It was, but not to the general public. No. So that's something that
we actually have footage of the Balkan Wars, and we don't show it.
Very interesting.
There is Dutch footage. There is Dutch footage that is reused on and on and on, but there is this other footage, and it is incredible. They actually, the reporters, they actually march with the military, and they almost catch up to the Bulgarian forces. And as they enter some of the towns, the Bulgarians have executed all the town leaders, and there's actual filmed footage.
Wow, it's like the first war atrocities, basically captured on film.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
So Pete, this is a broad historical subject, right? But you also found a niche, and you're describing the Greek-Americans, as we're here in America, that went to fight in the Balkan Wars for Greece. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right, exactly. So that is what we've been discussing, is a little bit of the background of the bigger picture, and what I discovered was some footnotes here and there, just being interested in some of the more successful, smaller modern wars of the early 20th century. I discovered that Greece had actually won 2 wars. And then researching that, I discovered that Greek Americans had participated on a large scale in Greece. They had gone back and fought. So the migrant workers that came to the United States to better their lives, they left everything behind.
Because of the Ottoman Empire, there were refugees and
yes.
survivors of genocide and other
the majority, the core of the Greek Americans, or the Americanized Greeks that had come to the United States, the vast majority came from the Peloponnese, right? Peloponneso, because that was what made up the kingdom of Greece. So they came to the United States. However, the other Greeks from the Ottoman-held areas, right? They consider themselves Greek. They didn't refer themselves as Ottomans. They referred to them. They were Greek Christians, Greek Orthodox. So between the two of those numbers, the ones that were obligated to return to Greece and fight were the Greeks from the Peloponnese who had served in the Greek military. They were considered reservists, so they had to go back. So when the actual war broke out in October of 1912, they got called back.
So you had a question about that.
Yeah, well, this is an interesting question because attitudes shift about this. I remember when we were talking about this earlier, you had mentioned also something about this, that how does the attitude of the United States government reflect on these people going over to fight in Greece? I mean, understandably, this is before the days of NATO and stuff like that, so obviously the alliance code is not as set in. It's a little bit more of a loose situation. So how did that exactly play out? Did anybody in the American government say, hey, where are these guys going? Aren't they supposed to be fighting for America? And, involvement in foreign wars and so on. Was there any kind of dynamic about that?
Conflict of interest, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, there was. So the United States had opened itself up because of the Industrial Revolution, right? They needed as many people to come and work, right? So there were hundreds of thousands of Greek migrants here that were expected to leave, right? They were not expected to stay. So they came here, and the majority of them realized this is a good life. We can do way better here and still help the homeland by sending, money, supporting some of the family, and maybe even bringing, becoming citizens and bringing the family here. So the events that transpired in the early 1900s had never been seen before. So it was a curiosity. The general public, the Americans in general, observed this with great interest. And it was covered in newspapers like you wouldn't believe. Like I didn't believe until I discovered all this, which is in my book. And so the general public, the American public, saw this as a curiosity. They were aware of what the Ottomans were doing and how they mishandled the rule of the people that lived under their domain, right? The minorities.
So by this period, the American consulate in Turkey, in the Ottoman Empire, and a lot of New York Times used to actually talk about the atrocities that the Turks were committing in a lot of the papers. So that was kind of you're saying it's a curiosity thing because they kind of like were aware that there was something really bad happening in a part of the world,
yes.
And they felt a kinship to these people.
The United States was still ingrained in its view as a Christian people, Protestant Christians, and they knew that the Christian minorities in the Ottoman Empire were discriminated against.
So there were a lot of missionaries that went there as well.
Yes, absolutely. The Methodists were, one of the top ranking that went. One of the, the Protestant groups. So the people of the United States, they were curious. The government of the United States had a particular, attitude that was, well, look, on the just looking at it, the icing on the cake, so to speak. Very, very, looking at it liberally, it was, these are not U.S. citizens. The United States is not exporting them. They came and now they're leaving, right? They're going back. It's not our place to get involved with Greek nationals. They came here legally. They're here to work, and eventually we're going to leave anyway. So they're leaving. However, that did not stop the Turkish government, the representatives, the ambassadors and the consuls here in the United States from lodging formal complaints. They were not happy. No. So there's two aspects of that. There is the financial. The Greeks sent millions and millions of dollars back home, and the fact that the Greeks were organizing here. So the Greeks had military clubs. So from 1910 to 1912, there were organized military associations, and they would do drills, and the veterans who are not veterans, but those that were, let's say, reservists, better term is reservists, they would help drill others, either others that were reservists or Greeks from the Ottoman lands, and they would do some training. And so, curiously enough, there were regiments. One of the biggest regiments was a New York regiment of Greeks, and they outfitted themselves with surplus U.S. Army uniforms. And when they got to Greece, since they had been organized, they got to Greece early on in the fighting. They were sent as a regiment to the front lines and fought in U.S. Army surplus uniforms.
Pete, as you're saying this, I'm getting chills, man. This is very, very interesting and exciting. Let me ask you this. We'll do a couple more points. With America's involvement, they actually did fight a campaign against the pirates, like against the Ottomans, right? From the shores of Tripoli, as the song goes. With the Marines.
Yes. Which is that is something that happened way before, and it the Barbary pirates, that was a problem. So yes, it was. And as a matter of fact, there were Greeks involved. So they supported. They were the only ethnic group amongst those that had been contracted to help the Marines as locals. The only ones that stayed and fought with the Marines were the Greeks. So there is a direct connection. It's part of the official U.S. Marine Corps history that the Greeks stood and fought while all the other groups that had been contracted to help them, whether in logistics, supplies, or as scouts, they all left when the fighting happened, but the Greeks stayed with the Marines, which is an event that happened, prior. We're talking about something prior.
Okay, but we do definitely the American government then had a good connection. With the Greek community.
So there is a little bit of an issue. Once the Barbary pirate issue was quelled, when they put that down, they quickly moved on. There were contracts. There were secret contracts between the Ottoman government, the Ottoman Empire, and the United States regarding naval ships.
Okay.
So there was an interest.
Yes, I just want to say we're only scratching the very even top surface of Peter's book. I mean, first of all, Peter, could you show us the book?
Please.
We want to see. Wow, and look how many pages total did you get into that?
Well, it's I'll tell you right now, it's according to the last page, it's 686 pages.
Wow.
And it was
show it again. I'm sorry. One more time. Just show it one more time.
Yeah, give us a nice. There we go. The Forgotten Heroes of the Balkan Wars, Greek-Americans and Philhellene, and that's another thing we didn't even get to this yet, and we will get to this because this is not the last time we're talking to Peter. We're just scratching the surface here. So we're going to also talk about the Philhellenes that are a participant of these campaigns. And a lot of other interesting things. Pete really did a great service, including a great service to those who have veterans in their lineage. He did a total decryption of a lot of the awards and a lot of the medals that people have gotten and recognition that they've gotten. So people who don't know, who may have inherited these things in their family, can actually know what they are, because there's not really that much information out there. And Pete has really been looking in the archives and finding some amazing stuff. And also there are some pictures in there as well. And it's just amazing to see how you really just dove into this and found so much stuff that's original, new, unpublished, and that's going to make your book definitely of great interest to anybody who has an interest in the subject, from expert to even those who are a little bit more casually interested. So we're going to get back and talk about this considerably more.
I think so. I think we're going to have to do a few more programs.
Well, I appreciate it, and I just wanted to make sure I did mention that the book and its narrative ended up being all about the Greek-American perspective, which has never been written about before. Right. And it really started with those New York Greek-Americans, and then it became everybody else. The idea of the Philhellenes and the whole uniform thing and the military thing, and like you said, there are medals and battles, and so it started from very simply the Greek-Americans, and I found I have hundreds of other pages could be written just on them. It was just incredible. I never thought I was going to find as much primary source material as I did. So it was overwhelming. Many times I thought I would never finish this. I had to figure out a way to compress it all into the book that I have, and I meant it to also be a reference, because context is for kings, as they say. So if you want to know what it was like to live in that time, I give it to you. What did the Greek-Americans or the American Greeks live like? What were their conditions? What was the feel of America then? I got that for you. How much did they earn? Got it. All that stuff is there.
Pete, how can we get your book?
I'm fortunate to be able to say that it's on Amazon. It's on barnesandnoble.com. There's an e-version, Nook, and the other one. There's the
Kindle.
Yes, the Kindle and the Nook, and of course there's the paperback.
Well, I think someone's going to want to hold this in their hands, honestly. I think this is the kind of book you're not going to be reading on a... Even though it's great that you've made it available that way, but I think it's amazing to hold something like this in your hands and turn the page on this one. Absolutely. It looks like a phenomenal job, and I can't wait to read it. So thank you so much.
I just wanted to just wrap it up by just saying we learn a lot about the Greeks of the European diaspora, I guess, from like northern Epirus, from Alexandria in Egypt, that actually helped build modern Greece, and especially up to the 1900s and 1910s. But we never heard about the Greek-Americans, and especially the Greeks from New York, who you're covering, which actually did as much as they did, and they helped save the nation. This is incredible.
Oh, absolutely. That's I have quotes of prominent people, stating that exactly. So
this has to be taught in our academia here in America, and we're going to discuss ways to push and promote, and we're going to do something bigger also to promote the book and you very shortly as well.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate your support. Thank you very much. Had a great time being on your show, and I look forward to doing this again and discussing other angles, and bringing up some other factoids that we didn't get a chance to cover. I have plenty to talk about, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. This is Billy Chrissochos,
George Selinsky,
Quest of Prometheus from the Hellenic History series, and you can find us on patreon.com. That's patreon.com, Hellenic History series, where we produce educational videos. This show right here that searches for the quest of for knowledge and truth in modern Greek history, and other projects as music related and art related projects as well that deal with Hellenic history. And we're very honored to have had Peter Giakoumis, and historian and author, a very good friend that we go back a long way with, a lot of our musical and other educational projects that we've done through the years, and we'll discuss again in the future. And we'll see you again next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.